Capitalism's crisis, how to organise. I think the first thing that needs to be said generally about this topic is that whatever answers we come up with, it's certainly not business as usual for the left. I think precisely for some of the reasons that we've been looking at over the week with Hillel and others, this crisis is unique. It's got unique dynamics. We are entering a new period, and I think that necessitates new thinking and a fresh approach from the left. We talked about the problems that the capitalist class has in terms of formulating its own strategy, and I think in terms of discussing our response, our alternative, we also have to take on board that the left, precisely given the defeats of the 20th century, the nature of Stalinism, is also in a bit of a crisis, and I think it's important we realise that, take that on board, and look to overcome these problems that we find. Because what the working class internationally obviously lacks is a party formation. We see a sea of competing, hostile, bureaucratically controlled formations which have little or no relation to the working class movement itself, and are often even counterposed to that movement in articulating their own interests and replicating their own little groups. This disunity is something we must immediately take head on in order to fight for what is obviously objectively necessary in these conditions. Not a party of labourism, but a party precisely of Marxism, with Marxist solutions, global solutions to what is quite obviously a global crisis. As anyone said, the working class without a party is nothing, but with a party it is everything, and I think that is precisely what we must have in mind in discussing how we organise and fight back. So what sort of party do we need then? The first obvious thing to be said is that the left actually needs to organise and fight for, openly and honestly, the politics it purports to uphold, the basic political principles of Marxism, and were that to be the case overnight, we'd be definitely in a stronger position. But what are, in my opinion, the fundamental political goals of Marxism and the principles we should organise around? Firstly, class political independence from the bourgeois state. No government coalitions with the bourgeoisie, and to fight for, as Kautsky put it, a party of irreconcilable, consistent and unshakable opposition. For internationalism, one of the greatest poisons of the workers' movement of the 20th century, in holding our movement back, was the theory, so-called, of socialism in one country. We have to be clear that from the start, in terms of organising our movement is international. It takes the unity of the international working class above all else. Increasingly, that also means that in terms of communists operating in Great Britain, we have to think increasingly on the level of the European Union and taking the fight to the highest possible level that we can. Extreme democracy, there are two elements of this that we in the CPGB raise. Extreme democracy as against the state, therefore the working class becoming the hegemon in the fight for democracy, in the fight for workers' rule. So some of the demands we discussed this week: annual elections, instant recallability, representative on a workers' wage and a popular militia, part of this struggle for the democratic republic, the form of working class rule. But there's another element to extreme democracy, which I think is absolutely crucial in the fight to articulate genuine Marxist politics again and struggle for a party. And that is extreme democracy within our own movement itself, against these regimes that exist on the left at the moment, erecting shibboleths to keep their purity from other groups, etc. That's part of it. And also the struggle against opportunism must be conducted in the most open, democratic and polemical fashion possible, because it achieves clarity about where we actually do disagree and gets rid of rhetoric and bluster, etc., that are keeping our movement divided. I think that's absolutely important. Comrade Stuart King last week made the point that the left at the moment is too polemical, and I think he couldn't be more wrong. I think actually the left avoids serious polemic, serious engagement with each other's ideas, and I think is part of the struggle for clarifying our movement and what we need to do. Also, we need to break with the current orthodoxy on the left of this notion of Leninism. And I think the discussions that we've had with Lars Lee this week have been particularly instructive to that, because at the moment, as I've outlined before, the left, it seems to be organising on a model of which is almost, again, an insult to the Bolsheviks post-1921. It's almost as if you might forgive it if we were organising in civil war conditions, huge state repression, but it's absolutely not justified. And as I say, this model of Leninism, so-called, is actually a product of the defeat of our working class movement, not its strengths. And I think what it does do is articulate pre-Marxist forms of organisation, which Marx struggled against, particularly in the First International. We have to get that question absolutely crystal clear. And obviously, this unity is not something we can put off to tomorrow. This is not something that we can say, okay, well, obviously we're a little bit weak at the moment, but maybe if we go along and things start to move, maybe somehow spontaneously this will create a dynamic towards unity. Now, there's an element of truth in that, but I think unless we actually address head-on the questions now and fight for the organisation now that we need, then if we don't do that, we're going to be necessarily weaker in future times. And one of the main I think polemical tasks that we have to fight for in agitating for Marxism in all avenues of struggle is breaking with this notion, again, which I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but it's this notion today that basically the task of Marxists in this period is to somehow set up formations that they know to be insufficient and programmatically not delimited between reform and revolution as some sort of catching mechanism, as some sort of signpost to sort of meet the masses halfway, as it were, and use it as a signpost towards Marxism. As Rosa Luxemburg points out quite lucidly in a polemic with Edward Bernstein, these manifestations of opportunism are not actually signposts towards Marxism, they actually lead in different directions. I think, again, we have to bear that in mind when coming to formulating our alternative and our approach, because quite clearly, again, the point was made during the week's discussions, which I thought was useful. The left, the Marxist left, so-called, trying to create formations such as the SLP, Socialist Alliance, or Socialist Party Respect, is not just an insult to Bolshevism, but as comrades have pointed out, it's an insult to Menshevism. I think that the strategic question for our movement today is how to precisely break with labourism in a positive fashion, and that means articulating the need for a Marxist party and struggling for that. What about the CPGB? What are we arguing for? What are we doing? How are we doing it? We are firmly committed to the fight for a Marxist party that can win millions to its banner. We have to break with this conception of the, as I say, the top-down vanguard party. We want a mass party. For Lenin and Kautsky, there was no real distinction between mass and vanguard. It was highlighting and bringing together the vanguard of the class, the best elements, but with a view to winning the majority of the working class, because socialism is the conscious act of the majority, a point that Marx made, again, against the anarchists. We have to have a project for that and win millions to our banner. But that's obviously going to take time. We have to intervene where political initiatives throw themselves up and fight for what's needed, and that's what we've done over the last period. In the face of quite hostile opposition at times, we've intervened in these projects and said, no, we need to go in a partyist direction, and it's Marxism that matters, it's principle that matters. But clearly for us, because we want to be a mass party of the working class in that sense, we don't. It doesn't follow from that we say, well, anyone's welcome, right? Anyone's welcome on any basis. So you're a worker, come and join us. You want revolution, okay, come and join us. What for us is important in the CPGB is the question of programme, and programme as being the highest form of the working class theory and memory. And a guide to political action. That's what matters for us, and we look to unite around the acceptance of that programme. So it's not about agreeing on every particular point on the national question, on this historical question, because that's not how parties are built. What it's about acceptance of the programme as a whole, and the ability, and actually the duty, to articulate disagreements where they raise themselves within the framework of the programme on tactical questions, in terms of different lines that are taken on different questions. That is the sort of model that we look to for genuine unity, not a bureaucratic unity where minorities are silenced and not allowed to articulate themselves, but actually genuine unity, which must be fought for and won and constantly rewon in a process of open political struggle, which can then also educate the working class, reading our press, coming to our meetings, etc. So that's why, for us, we put on events like the Communist University to get extremely interesting speakers from different traditions together to articulate their views on the discussions, the questions of the day. And this final session, I think, really is the question we need to think about coming from this university. What have we learned during the course of the week that can inform our drive to unity? And we welcome comments obviously contributing to this, also to the weekly work. The weekly